All right, everyone, welcome to the Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson. I am here with Alyssa Polizzi, my co-host. We are joined again by meme analysis, Chris Gabriel, and Spiritfire Tarot, aka Matt Johnson. And today we are doing The Green Knight, part review of the film that was just released recently, part analysis of the original Arthurian legend. And to start, we're going to do a brief summary of the story itself. Let me share it real quick. Is it showing up? One more time. You see it now? Okay.
Yep, it's working now. All right, so we're going to read through the story, and this is a general overview of the classic legend. Not every detail is included, but for those of you who aren't too familiar or want a refresher, here is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So it's New Year's Eve, and King Arthur is hosting a feast in his court with all of his knights. Suddenly, a Green Knight rides in. His armor is green, his skin is green, his hair is green, his horse is green, everything's green. And this night he offers a challenge to Arthur and his knights. Someone is to strike him once with his axe on the condition that the Green Knight may return the same blow in 1 year's time. Arthur's nephew Gawain accepts this challenge and approaches the knight. The Green Knight kneels, exposes his neck, and Gawain chops off his head. The Green Knight's headless body reaches down, picks up its own head, gets back on its horse, and says, 1 year from now, you will meet me at the Green Chapel, where you will receive your blow and we will complete our game. So an uneasy year passes for Gawain, and on All Hallows Day, he decides to embark on his journey to find the Green Chapel and meet his fate. He travels deep into the forest to search for the Green Chapel and gets lost for many days. Finally, on Christmas Day, he stumbles upon the castle of Lord Bertilock and his wife, Lady Bertilock, who allow him to take refuge within their walls. Lady Bertilock proposes a game, or Lord Bertilock proposes a game, during which Gawain's stay, in exchange for whatever he catches while hunting, Gawain will give him whatever he catches in the castle. Gawain finds this proposition strange, but he accepts. So the next morning, Lord Bertilock leaves the castle to hunt, and Gawain is approached by Lady Bertilock, who attempts to seduce him. Gawain tries to avoid her without refusing her outright, which would insult her. So he allows her to give him one kiss. Lord Bertilock returns with a deer, and per their game, presents it to Gawain, who in exchange gives the Lord a kiss. The next morning, the same thing happens. Lord Bertilock is more aggressive, Lady Bertilock is more aggressive, managing to steal 2 kisses from Gawain, and Lord Bertilock gives Gawain a boar, and in exchange, Gawain gives him 2 kisses. On the 3rd morning, the lady tries again to seduce him even more aggressively, which he avoids, but she again gets 3 kisses this time, and then offers him a token of her love, a green girdle, which she says will protect him from any harm. Gawain finally gives in and accepts her token of love, wearing the green girdle around his waist. The Lord returns with a fox, but Gawain says nothing of the girdle, nor does he give it to Lord Bertilock. Instead, he offers him 3 kisses. Gawain leaves and finally arrives at the ultimate destination of his quest, the Green Chapel, on New Year's Day. There he finds the Green Knight, who approaches him with an axe, ready to complete their game. Gawain kneels and exposes his neck to the Green Knight, who takes a swing. He stops when Gawain flinches. The Green Knight raises the axe and tries again. This time, Gawain does not flinch, but the knight again stops his swing before making contact. Gawain gets angry and commands the Green Knight to deliver his blow. So for a third time, the knight brings down the axe, but stops just short of Gawain's neck, barely nicking the skin. Having received his blow, the Green Knight declares the game over. But then the Green Knight laughs and reveals his true identity. He is Lord Bertilock. He tells Gawain that he was sent by Morgan Le Fay and that he was passed the test by remaining virtuous and refusing the advances of his wife. But Gawain becomes downcast and admits that he accepted a token of her love, the green girdle. Lord Bertilock invites Gawain to come to the castle for New Year's feast, but Gawain refuses and rides back to Camelot, displaying the girdle around his waist as a mark of shame. When he arrives back at Arthur's court, the other knights are overjoyed to see that he is alive and well and has completed his quest. They see the green girdle as a mark of glory, a trophy taken from the Green Knight, but Gawain feels his victory is tainted and cannot celebrate.
So that's the story of the Green Knight. There are different versions of that. The film released recently shows us one version. The Arthurian legend is a little bit different. And the Sean Connery version, The Sword of the Valiant, is probably once again a little bit different in its telling, but we're going to explore the themes overall and the movie itself. The movie was released, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Something like that. Yeah. So Matt, Chris, what did you guys think of the movie? You guys both saw it. What's your take?
I liked it a lot. I'd read the story in high school, and I've been a fan of the other A24 movies, so it was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. I really liked it. It was felt very different than most movies that I've seen out with a big theatrical release lately. It had kind of like an indie feel to it, but also, there was a lot of. It also had like this. There was a tremendous amount of energy and resources and everything made into making it pretty and pleasing and all those different on a lot of different levels, aesthetically and thematically and everything. So I wonder if we were not in such a strange time with movies and entertainment in general, whether a movie like that would have gotten the same degree of attention, like going up against like Black Widow and being like 3 at the box office, but hey, it's a win for us that something like that could happen. So
I feel like I noticed a few people when we saw it. There weren't that many people in the theater, but we definitely saw a few people walk out during the movie. And I have to wonder how many people were expecting to see something and they got another thing entirely. Because even for me, I actually hadn't read the legend before that. I didn't know about the story. And so even I thought, I was like, this movie is really strange. And like the story, this must not be the story. Like there must be some arty thing they're doing to like embellish upon like what's up with the castle? Like, why are they spending so much time in this castle? Like that doesn't seem important to the story. Anyways, so I think it's interesting that a movie like this would be made. And it does kind of make me giggle at how many people probably saw it and we're just like, what the fuck is this? And like, couldn't even finish.
Like expecting
my friend had
something like
walkouts too.
really? Okay. Yeah, I actually didn't watch the trailer, but I saw this comment that the trailer maybe made it seem like it would have been more of this classic, not like an action movie, but just something that maybe seemed more relatable to other styles of, say, like ancient fantasy type movies. And instead it's this incredibly artistic, moody piece that I think can be extremely disorienting and challenging. I think that's what I felt sitting through the movie itself. It was very challenging in good ways and also in ways that I at first didn't know why it felt that way. Like these really long scenes that they had, even in the beginning, as Gawain left Camelot, and you have that long scene of him just walking with the horse down the path with the children, and you're kind of sitting there. And I think we're used to such immediacy in our film and really general entertainment content that we're just kind of wondering, what's the point of this? Like, what's being communicated here? Is something about to happen? And then nothing necessarily does. There's all these like subtle aspects to pay attention to. And that I think is a big challenge of the movie. And if I'm to sort of connect that back to the original legend itself, I think that what they captured was some of that kind of dreamy kind of, I don't know, this way, especially if you read the story itself, that it kind of goes on and on explaining certain details of the night or all of these aspects of like the environment. And it feels like it drags on for a while, but it's more experiential than anything. Like you're kind of being put into this moody dreamlike state. And I think that they capture that in a way that we don't really see in other movies, because we're not really honoring, I think, these old stories in that way.
Yeah, it kind of occurs to me that that's something of like what kind of happens with this character, in that he's like, you get the sense in the movie especially that I think it conveys this well, that there's this guy who's like, he's at that sort of like late adolescence, early adulthood. He's just like desperate for something to happen. And then like suddenly something happens and he's like, oh shit, something happened. You know? And so the rest of the movie is like him unpacking the oh shit moment as it's slowly like descending on him. And you know, like piling up in layers. And that's, I think there's that sort of like, there's almost kind of like, it's almost like visually conveying that sense of foreboding, like, okay, now, you know, like now you're in it, and any moment now this thing could kind of get tense. And so, you know, through the movie, there are a lot of these like kind of like long pauses and lingering on things and very slow establishing shots that all, you know, like, and then all of a sudden something happens and then it kind of goes back to normal. And in a way, it almost sort of reminded me of the movie, a very different movie in a lot of ways, but the movie Let the Right One In is a lot like that, where it's this sort of like moody, dramatic piece. And then all of a sudden, like moments of extreme horror and chaos kind of happen. And then it just goes back to being this sort of long, moody, dramatic piece. And you sort of forget what kind of movie you're watching. And I think there was a little bit of that. Like there's like this kind of like, it's sort of playing around with genre. Even from the look of the film, it had this very like retro 80s, you know, it sort of, it looked a little like, I mean, in a way it looked a little like Excalibur. It looked a little like Lady Hawk. It looked a little like Willow. And it didn't really look like more contemporary fantasy type things like The Witcher or even, you know, Game of Thrones. But it wasn't really like any of those kind of movies. It was like something different. And so it's kind of like playing with your expectations of what sort of story you're watching.
It kind of plays the beheading game with the audience, because so many people, they go to the movies and they want, oh well, when does this happen? When do I get to see the villain? When do I know, oh well, the good guy has to do this and that? And it's, you know, no, stop. You know, you have to go with it. You have to journey with Gawain to understand the story. So you have to behead. And I think, you know, this is one of the really big points in the whole movie. You know, I'm hoping we're getting we're talking about the slowness of it, but it opens with the beheading. So, and what an important act. So that beheading motif, not just visually, but symbolically and spiritually, is experienced by the audience. You know, the person who expects Excalibur is going to be beheaded.
So let's get into that. The story itself, even without the movie, but the story itself is kind of, it doesn't make sense, right? And I think that is part of the symbolism itself, is that the challenge of beheading. It's like, it's not a challenge to a duel. It's not this masculine competition of like, okay, on guard, like let's fight. It's like the challenge is like, okay, cut off my head. And you know, that's any knight is going to respond to that in a way that's like, well, what? Like, what do you mean cut off your head? That's not a challenge. Is this some trick? What kind of trick is this? And the whole story, I feel like in itself is like an upside down story. Like, it doesn't make sense. The challenge of cutting your head off is like, that's not a masculine thing to do. It's dishonorable for me to just chop off your head. And it continues from there in this kind of nonsensical way of the castle saying is also like, this isn't very knightly, or where's the action? The whole story itself, like especially in the film, I think once you leave the theater, you're probably left feeling like that was sort of an inverted story. You've been turned upside down, or you've lost your head. And so I wonder, what is that about? What's the deal with the upside down land of the Green Knight?
So I think one of the points that gives us a lot of insight we can get just by the timing, which is New Year's. And one of my favorite Jung essays is on the trickster. And there are trickster festivals during New Year's. There's the idea of the Saturnalia king. You appoint a fool king and you kill him at the end of it. You kill him after he has had his very brief, I think, a week-long reign. So this idea of kind of a strange character. So the way that it's, because these are inverted rituals, they'd have fool popes as well, and they'd have ass. They would sing, you know, they'd praise the ass. So I think what we can see in the Green Knight himself is that fool. He is the fool. Archetypally, he would be the fool, even though Gawain is the one who is made a fool. And that is the kind of stepping down. He has to be shown his place. But this kind of godly fool as a green man is a well-established symbol. For, you know, we did the fool, who is a green man, in the tarot. So we start out with him coming in and allowing himself to be beheaded. And then what I think is the really important part, I don't know how familiar you all are with George Bataille, but he had his Society of the Asafel, which is a headless man. So my friends and I resurrected the magazine. There was an Asafel magazine, and that is also the essential ritual of Thelema. To find your true will, you have to evoke the image of yourself beheaded. Your body without your head is your true will. So again, this natural force, this green natural force, does not need a head. And so he comes in to disrupt the order that has been built up, not just over that year, but over all the years of Arthur's rule.
Yeah, I like this idea as well when we lean into this symbolism of the cutting off of the head and the sort of chaos principle that's being introduced into this ordered place, as well as, you know, what really happens, I think, in the moment of the Green Knight being beheaded ultimately is symbolic of the test in the game that's been presented at the court, that in some ways Arthur is allowing this sort of natural chaotic principle to come in, and everyone has to suspend reality and kind of cut off that more logical thinking, rationalizing function to be able to not only entertain what's happening, you know, the figure of the Green Knight being so fantastic in the first place, but to take on the game itself, which is completely illogical. Like, why would I choose to cut off this guy's head if he's going to cut off my head? Who would agree to do this? So everybody has to sort of suspend reality and enter into the kind of green man or the fool's realm in this case, which has then that potential to transform and challenge and just kind of cause chaos for the sake of chaos. And I think that's an important part that's maybe slightly lost in the movie version. When we look at the old Arthurian tale, we see that Morgan Le Fay is behind this, and really she's just like stirring shit up to stir it up. She wants to mess with Guinevere, which I think they did a little of in the movie when she sort of like becomes possessed. She wants to challenge, the order that Arthur has presented, and to really sort of make them face and put a mirror up to how honorable are you? How knightly are you? How chivalrous are you truly? And the story sort of ends ultimately with Gawain having to walk away with this piece of reality that can't be denied. And then everyone goes around wearing it. So it's very trickstery in this way. And it's both through the vehicle of the Green Knight, but I think also the kind of the goddess behind him is what also is very interesting to me that I would love to get into. I'll stop there.
One thing that I do think is kind of really well conveyed in the movie is that there's this sort of sense when the game is sort of announced, and obviously, like you said, Morgan Le Fay has conjured up this thing, but nobody really knows this. She has a vested interest in it being Gawain who does this. Like, she's trying to like push him out of the nest, and he has this sense that he's kind of like this formless thing already, like he's not really anything. He's the nephew of the king and everybody kind of tolerates him. He's still kind of this kid, but he doesn't have any good tales to tell. He doesn't have any adventures. He's not this grizzled veteran like all these people who are sitting around this table who have all this honor. And he wants some of that. And so this thing comes up, and you see all these other knights who have presumably been fighting campaigns and whatever, and are totally no stranger to violence and whatever else, see this guy come in and issue this challenge, and they're just like, nope, like they want nothing to do with it. And yet this kid is like, well, I'll do it. And there's this, you can kind of put yourself in the place of being that kind of like spunky kid who doesn't really know what you're signing up for. You're going to jump off the highest part of the diving thing, or you're going to, go off the biggest end of the half pipe on your skateboard, whatever it is. Like, you don't really know what it is that you're signing up for when you do this. And in that game, the knight never really says, at least in the movie version, and it's been a while since I read the whole, some of the other versions, like the Tolkien translation stuff, but he doesn't say like, you have to behead me. He's like, whatever blow you give, I'm going to give back to you, and yet this kid is like eager to show off in front of everybody and just, hacks this head off, and that's one of the nonsensical elements. Like there are all these things that that doesn't have to be the choice that he makes. And yet in that arena, in that sense of being in the theater of everything, that's what seems like the thing for this young person to do. And it's almost kind of like he doesn't know what he has just signed up for. But what he has just signed up for is the process, kicking in the process of, okay, you are going to go through this journey because your ego wants acclaim, wants respect, wants everybody to look at you and, think all these wonderful things about you. And you're going to go on this quest to go get that. And in the process, that same ego that's pushing you out is going to get lopped off, and it's like, if he had known that, he may not have signed up for it. But it kind of reminds me of that thing in the Bible, he who seeks to save his soul will lose it. He who seeks who doesn't care for his soul will gain it. And so, in agreeing to this chopping off of the head, he is sort of like agreed to the death of that that sort of egotistical, youthful thing in order to grow up and experience things at a new level.
I thought one striking symbol in the movie in the beginning was that pentacle on Arthur's clothes, and it is a big part also of the original story as well, because he does Gawain does wear it on his shield, and we start getting into this symbolism of the kind of pentagram or these 5 points, and they get into this in the original story too, like the 5 senses, the 5 fingers, the 5 wounds of Christ, the 5 knightly virtues. There's this numeric rhythm that's sort of flowing through all of this. But one point I thought you brought up that was really interesting, that in your Substack, was as Gawain as this Knight of Pentacles, and maybe a very failed sort of knight or Page of Pentacles even initially, and I'm sort of embarking on this journey. And I don't know, I would love for you to expand on that a little bit, because I thought that was clever. It was good.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, the way in the article that Alyssa was mentioning, I sort of read it as, or I saw the story as this journey from the Page of Pentacles in the tarot, or coins or discs, depending on what deck you're working with, journeying in this developmental way towards like what it actually means to become a knight. Because at the beginning of the story, this person is part of the court, but he's not actually a knight. He's not seated at the round table. He's not kind of given the same sort of respect that all these other knights are, and he has to go out on this quest to earn it. And Alyssa talked a little bit about the symbolism of the pentagram or the pentacle, which is actually Gawain's symbol in even in the original stories, and that's a thing you can see. Heraldry of the pentacle of Gawain is like is a real thing. And there is, I mean, we could spend an entire we could spend hours just talking about pentagrams and all the symbolism for that. But there is, I think, one thing that to me kind of stands out about the symbolism of the pentagram is it is very much the symbol of it's a symbol that has like spiritual significance and spiritual echoes. It's used in Christianity, it's used in Wicca, it's used in all these in lots of different traditions, and it shows up in a lot of different places. But it has this kind of character. It's a very human symbol. It's a symbol of the human being in some ways, and it's a symbol of our. You see this sort of like fivefold. The way our kind of like even something very modern. Here's a good example of this. Modern experimental psychology breaks down personality into 5 different categories that it wouldn't take much change or imagination to see that those things are all sort of like the directions in which human beings are able to move. Like there's this kind of like fivefoldness to our extroversion or reaching out, our the intuition and going down, like all of the different things that kind of make up what it is to be human can sort of be expressed in this fivefold way. And so as Gawain is like making this developmental journey, he is sort of like encountering, and in the tarot we talk about the suit of pentacles being related to earthy physical things. It's the suit of the body and kind of the blood and guts of reality, and that's kind of what he has to gain some competency in order for him to really be this knight that he's trying to become.
It's also like, literally the limbs and the head. The pentacle as an image of the body And the story is the threat of losing that fifth point. There's a really interesting movie called Pontypool, and I think it has a very strong comparison. Basically it's a zombie movie, but the virus is language based, and it's spread through speech, basically only English. It's spread through English, and pretty much you get caught in a word loop, and you're unable to break out of it. You keep repeating the same thing, and I'm going to spoil it, but it doesn't. The story is not the point. Blah blah blah. Basically, the way that our protagonists are able to overcome it is they stop making sense. They literally just speak nonsense, but they're able to prevent their infection. So that's what we see with Gawain as well. Like you need to allow yourself to be beheaded to win the game, to win the beheading game that we enter. When we enter the realm of rationality, when we enter the realm of speech, we already are accepting defeat. There's I mentioned Bataille's Astafal earlier. There's a great quote from him. Tragedy is the impotence of reason. When we accept a rational view of the world, when we view the world with our heads, we are also accepting its inverse, right? The pentagram, the downward. And the way that I always like to view that is like the upright pentacle views the head as the fifth, and the pentacle views the penis or the vagina as the fifth part of us, the dominant. They say the other brain. That's the like our instincts, our bodies. They are dominant, not our minds. And we see Gawain overcome that, but ultimately his life instinct still wins, though it's not the sexual form of libido. His desire to continue existing still wins out over his inhuman top virtues.
So this estrangement from the irrational, in some sense, or an estrangement from the feminine, is another way of phrasing it, I think, in the story. An estrangement from the pre-rational world, or the old world, is a big theme here, right? Is that Gawain is, in some sense, or Arthur's court is a masculine hierarchy. It's kind of like this shining beacon of light in the sort of Christian rational world. And then Gawain is sort of journeying into the land of the stranger, or the land of the feminine, or the land of the chaotic wild, in some sense, to kind of reabsorb some of that, right? And create sort of a resiliency, right? Resiliency by not abandoning entirely the irrational. Does that resonate? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt. I think it's a huge part of what's happening in this story, and I think it shows the kind of dynamic struggle of that era as you're moving away, or you're maybe in the flux of the transformation of a more pagan way of being. And how does that turn into more of this kind of, as you said, like Christian, logical, rational, more modern world, which the Arthurian myths in general, I think, do this really nice blending of both of these coming together, because the stories are deeply Christian and it shows the rise of Christianity. Yet at the same time, we see all of these folk pagan themes and the green man and the dark goddess, and these elements that I think defined that sort of pre-rational world, if you may. And in the original story, the Green Knight calls her Morgan the goddess. And I think if you sort of trace back Morgan Le Fay's roots, you see her tied to these old feminine deities that were part of the worship of that time. And so to me, when she comes back in this way, like she does through the Green Knight, it's a recognition of both what is happening in the culture at that time that's being pushed more into the shadow, you might say, yet is still showing how much power it still has, or that the way to move forward is to continue to hold both of these tensions together and be in the emergence of the Christian world while at the same time being in the magic of the old world. I think the Grail highlights this as well. It's a deeply Christian story, and at the same time, it's totally full of this magic of the old world, and I think that's part of Gawain's journey.
I'll just add, you can go next, Chris, but I'll just add, like, I think what's interesting is the castle, the whole castle scene is like Gawain's on like a very feminine quest in some sense in the castle, which is like he has to resist like being approached sexually. And, you know, you kind of imagine Gawain sort of running around like in a skirt, like, oh no, like, no, like, oh, sorry, like, can't catch me, like here's like a kiss. And then he actually ends up like kissing the Lord, even like he gives like kisses to Lord Bertolock. And he's very much like, it's not this masculine quest typically. He is instead on this strange sort of like a feminine quest of like being inside a castle locked down while the Lord is out and trying to stay virtuous, like resist being, courted by someone who is hunting him down. And I think that's very interesting, that getting back in touch with the feminine, and that by doing that, he like actually becomes like this man, this masculine knight, finally, by getting in touch with his feminine side or something like that.
You can go, Matt.
Okay, sorry. I think that's interesting that you say that, Arran, because to me, there's something almost like, it's not even necessarily, it's almost kind of like the story continually upsets his notions of, it's almost like he kind of leaves with this very like childish, cartoony version of what it means to be a knight, what it means to be out in the world on an adventure, what it means to be a man, like all of these kind of things. And so there's this constant sort of like subversion of what virtue is, what honor is. He's sort of like put into a lot of situations where he has to make a sort of moral judgment or moral decision. And very, like as the story, like a lot of these things he does, like he's not really like making, it's easy to like sit at home and go, well, I wouldn't do that, but he's sort of like constantly sort of encountering that whatever script he's been handed about how to be a man, how to be a knight, how to be whatever, is not adequate to the reality that he's facing, And so I think that those sort of like gendered notions of what it means to be any of these things are kind of part and parcel of that. Sort of like constant, like encounter with what reality is actually demanding versus what this, funny to use reality when we're talking about a movie as weird, as trippy as this one, but you know what I mean, like the actual environment that you're sort of interacting with cannot just be sort of encoded in these really easy to handle, like if this then that kind of heuristic, because every time he tries to kind of pull one of those, it doesn't quite work. There's a great scene in one of the little adventures that he has, is he encounters Saint Winifred is how she's identified, and it's this sort of like ghostly apparition who's has been beheaded and wants him to go and retrieve her head from the bottom of this lake. It's like his little video game task that he has to do to get to the next level. And you see there's this like little moment where he goes, well, so if I do this thing for you, are you going to reward me in some way? And she just looks at him and goes, why in the world would you even ask that? He just kind of is sort of like ashamed, and then he doesn't have an answer for why he would answer that. But it's because he's used to this kind of like transactional logic of how to go through things, and at every turn that's not what encounters it. That's not what he encounters there.
The story is certainly one of failure. I think it's a failure also of his upbringing in the court. And I think that there's a really valuable comparison to be made with, in the medieval work, it's not this, but in a lot of the later work, and so we're just going with that because it makes sense and it's fun, is Morgan's other son, Mordred, the bastard child of Arthur. So Gawain's half brother. And he gets it and he wins. Like, Gawain, by playing by the court rules, by following what he has been told, by containing himself to this narrative, pretty much misses out on all of the, he still misses out on the excitement of the other knights, misses out on the earthly pleasures. He is high, he is noble, he is pure, but he still fails. And we're in the decline of Arthur's kingdom already. It's not as, and we see if in one of the futures, he still would have been a paltry king, still would have been a failed king. Mordred is more of like a crowned and conquering child who overcomes his being a bastard and defeats Arthur and defeats the whole kingdom, becomes the king, with the people behind him. Like, it's very interesting to see, the character who plays by the rules, the child of Le Fay, who is more Arthur than Le Fay, whereas Mordred, in many of the depictions, is far more like Le Fay, far more pagan, cruel.
Yeah, much more like an element of chaos that we see with Mordred. And in some ways, I think it's interesting to see the contrast of how Gawain is expressed in the movie, because in the stories, he tends to be much more of this valiant figure. And yes, the Green Knight is a strange story because he does have some level of failure, but it's still colored in this way of success and triumph and honor and virtue. But the movie makes it feel very mysterious about what really happens. Does he die at the end? Is he redeemed in some way? It really makes you face more of that motif and that theme of that tension between honor and failure. And I think more so in the movie, they grasp at that and make you face it. They make you really stare it in the face, because we watch in that kind of dream scene when Gawain runs away and then he becomes king in this false way, and it leads to not only his own downfall, but what appears to be the downfall of the kingdom. So there's this sense that false honor will ultimately ravage and destroy. And so what does it mean for him to own up to that? Does he lose his head at the end, and is that a symbolic loss, or does he truly die? And in the story itself, Gawain returns and they celebrate him, and even Bertiloc's like, oh, no worries, man, like, you succeeded. And it has this lightheartedness to it that is almost a little, it takes you back a moment when you're reading the story itself. But any thoughts on your guys's sort of interpretations of how it ends and what you think is being communicated in the movie?
I think, to me, I kind of looked at it as, there's this extended sequence where he is, when he's sitting there and the axe is coming down and he's flinching away from it, what he's, like the whole saying of your life flashing before your eyes. Well, he hasn't had much of a life before this. So that's not what he's giving up. It's like he's just been this kind of idle guy, like hanging around the castle and drinking too much and whatever. So the life that flashes before his eyes that's the thing that he's afraid of losing, right? And what if I go home to renown and I get to join this group of people and I am in line for the throne because my uncle doesn't have an heir and blah 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 blah, and I'm the one. And what you sort of see him go through one by one is these, like, all of his relationships in this little sequence are handled in this very instrumental way. Like, he has this lover that he's seen in a very distant sort of way in this in the prologue to all this, and I think it's also very important. We haven't mentioned this in the movie, the recent movie. The character, the woman, the actress who plays his lover is the same actress as Lady Burleigh in the castle, and very different to the point where you can almost not recognize her, but it's very like you're being given a clue that like that he there's something that he needs to be paying attention. There's a resemblance there, and you can almost sort of see him reacting to, and yeah, this is a fantasy world, but it's almost like the characters that are populating it are tropes. They're not really people. They're not people with their own kind of motivations. They're sort of like instruments, you know? And there's this part of him that says, okay, if I go home and I do this thing, what have I been doing? What's the script that I'm playing out? How am I going to treat this person? Oh, well, I got her pregnant. I'll take the baby and just kick her out, and that, because I'm of a different social station than she is. And that's a game that people have played for thousands of years, and they still do to some degree now. And you know, it's not out of phase to have that kind of thing happen in medieval Europe. There's there's all of the machinations and all the like machinery of moving around and politicking is the game that he's playing, and war and all of the stuff that in his to his adolescent mind is what he wants to participate in as a full member of the court. And you sort of see him arrive at this moment as he's played this whole scenario out of like, okay, this is the game that I left. This is the game I've been playing. This is the thing that I want to have continue. Maybe that actually sucks. Maybe I don't want that at all. And maybe I should just let this guy just chop my fucking head off, because fine. And then there's in the movie, and this is the ambiguous ending, when the Green Knight, when he just kind of is like, yeah, sure, I'm fine, I'm ready. The Green Knight senses this, sits down and says, oh, well played, and kind of does this off with your head thing as though, yeah, you passed the test. And it's almost kind of like, yes, now you're actually a knight. Because before, when you had the, like when it was the weapon, when it was the force, when it was the ability to inflict harm, when it was the power to sort of like ride into town and just be the badass that everybody has to get out of the way of, that's, like, if that's what you really want, then you're not worthy of any of those things, and sort of to say like, this is a bullshit game and I don't want to play. That's kind of like, okay, well, now maybe you're actually the person who should be playing this game, if anybody should. And I to me, that's kind of where, that's sort of how it kind of landed for me, is almost kind of like this ego disillusion of like, if you're trying to get the instruments of it, then it disqualifies you from all the supposed benefits of this chivalrous romantic ideal that you have.
One interpretation of the ending that I have is, I'm going to try and relate it back to the shadow, but Gawain, he has to journey out into like the land of the stranger, in some sense, like the land of chaos, like kind of like the land of the shadow. It's like in the sense of like, it's like a blind place. It's like you've lost touch with the old world. You're blind to its power now. So the old world is like in shadow for you. And Gawain goes out there and he has to actually go into the shadow and like absorb some of it, right? He takes the green girdle and he kind of like absorbs some of like the old world, the chaotic world. And there's the connection that Tolkien has to like Frodo. Like Frodo becomes tainted in his journey. Frodo goes into the land of shadow and he has to like save the world, but he takes the shadow back with him and like he's forever tainted. Gawain returns from the land of the shadow. He's absorbed some of it and he's become strong because of that. But at the same time, he's tainted and he can't like celebrate his journey. All the other knights are just like, yes, Gawain, good job, you did it. You're a knight now, but he's like downcast, he's sad, and he can't celebrate. And I think there's like an interesting lesson in there of like the need to really like embrace the white and to like embody the white, there has to be like an equal embodiment of the shadow in some sense, like in a different way you could phrase it. There's like Jung's quote that's something like, like the trees that reach to heaven have roots that reach to hell. It's like you have to grow in both directions in some way. Or just like the Christ sort of archetype of like the burden of light, the burden of truth requires a like absorption of all of the shadow as well. You can't open your eyes without like seeing the shadow of the world. And like becoming wise is also like becoming sort of tainted by the darkness of the world and having to carry that with you. And like the more aware you become, like the sadder you become, the more you see, the more depressed you become. And so there's all these dynamics that I think are quite interesting of the tainted Gawain and the need to become tainted in order to become strong in some way. Anyways, that's kind of a roundabout abstract analysis, but that's my interpretation of the ending.
It's interesting then, because then all of the knights kind of wear a piece of that shadow with them. And even that seems very trickstery in nature, because they wear it thinking that it represents this sense of honor and completion. And really, it's a marker of shame for Gawain, and he takes it back with him and wears it to sort of be reminded of that. And so it's a link back to that sort of old world that has been pushed aside, you might say, in this time of rational Christian order, yet at the same time marks each of these knights. And there's a sort of visual image and a symbol now of their corruptibility. And I think that that's what is important, is that this idea of the knight as this perfect, virtuous being has to be taken down several pegs. And Gawain is considered to be like flawed, but sort of in some ways very pure for that reason. Like, you are the most honorable of all of the unpure ones, because no one is fully pure. It would just be too unrealistic. And so this story to me is a really striking reminder of all of our sort of sinful nature, you might say, and the kind of penance one has to go through to kind of digest that and to integrate that, but then to walk forward knowing that you carry that sort of shadow within you. And I think that we lose sight of that, and the way that we might look at this time of high virtue in all areas of society, like the medieval world, might have lost touch with how corruptible they truly were. And this story is a really interesting psychological and symbolic exploration of the reminder of that.
I think there's also something powerful about even, our sort of like tendency to talk about the process that this Green Knight represents as taint or corruption or darkness or evil or shadow. And I think you really see this in the Arthurian legends have this tie to the kind of like Celtic culture. It's sort of like this old kind of like hangover from that. And there's a real tension, that kind of tension that you see between the sort of like pagan worldview and what we think of now as the Christian worldview, really was played out, and in some way respects is still played out in the Celtic world to a degree that mainstream Christianity so doesn't really acknowledge, to the same degree. And there's that kind of like folkish belief, that respect for things. There's something about the fact there's actually a speech that the lady of the castle gives about the meaning of the greenness of it. She kind of asks, why do you think he's green? And sort of talks about these processes of nature, and the way, the way growth is, on the one hand, it's beautiful, right, to see it, but it's also unstoppable. And there's something that humans, especially modern rational types of humans, really get scared of when we think about natural processes that are not under our control. We really want to try to like put a handle on it. And you know, there's the heroic, you know, pioneer that chops down the trees and establishes the border and is all that stuff. And that's Arthur's court, really. That's kind of like the shining light of that. And there's a tendency to look at that, the inverse of that, as sort of evil or dark. And it certainly has the potential to be that way. But it's also where growth and newness and renewal comes from. And so if you don't incorporate that, if you don't allow for the complexities and the second order effects of things, and for uncertainty to kind of reign, you miss out on the ability to renew. And that's sort of why, it's part of why the Arthurian myth has this element of decay that is kind of woven into it.
We're getting close now to, you know, an hour chat on this, but I wanted to sort of open up the floor for any final thoughts or things that struck you guys in the story or the movie, just anything else that you feel you'd like to bring up before we close out today. All right, well, looks like we have exhausted ourselves. So I want to thank you all for joining us today here at the Golden Shadow as we discuss the Green Knight. Thanks, of course, to Chris Gabriel, aka Meme Analysis, Matt Johnson, aka Spiritfire Tarot, and thanks to you, Arran, as well for co-hosting with me. Yes. So yeah, that's the Green Knight. I highly recommend going to watch the movie. It is beautiful, it is striking, and take a chance to read the story as well. Tolkien's translation is quite good, and it's a nice way to dive into the old literature of it. So keep an eye out for future streams and more episodes and events happening here at Golden Shadow, and hope everyone else has a great night. Thanks for showing up.